So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And I would like to thank ATF and FEFAC for the opportunity to introduce this stakeholder event to present Horizon 2020 projects, research and innovation projects relevant to livestock systems with a focus on crops and animals together to address food and nutrition security. And then we will have time to discuss research and innovation support to the adaptation of livestock farming systems and practices. I will have a few slides that will illustrate a little bit my presentation or my speech, but the slides don't really follow exactly the order of the speech, but I'll try to show the most important one at least. So clearly the build-up to the United Nations Food Systems Summit recently has made it clear that we need bold actions to transform the way the world produces, processes, and consumes food, which are essential elements for achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. With the Farm to Fork strategy, at EU level, the EU has positioned itself as a let's say, front runner, we could say, in addressing these challenges. And with this strategy, we aim, amongst others, to reduce the risk of different issues and problems like chemical plant protection products, the use of antibiotics, the loss of nutrients, and you heard also this morning about the intention to increase largely the area and the organic farming. Next to the Farm to Fork strategy, the second important EU policy is the biodiversity strategy. And we heard about this for 2030, which sets really key objectives that have really an impact, will have an impact on the farming sector. And amongst the main drivers of biodiversity decline, I think it's recognized, acknowledged that the intensive agricultural management, including pesticide use, climate change, and invasive alien species. I could mention a number, and you will see in the slides, a number of additional relevant policies like the EU methane strategy and other ones. Livestock and more broadly agriculture are part certainly of the problems, but they are also part of the solution. Of the solutions, I think there is no single solution. And we know that livestock production systems have both negative impacts, nitrogen surplus, air emissions, but also positive impacts, even if from what we heard this morning, we don't necessarily have the measurement techniques and data to quantify this. But certainly soil carbon sequestration, employment, etc., are certainly part of the positive aspects of livestock production and agriculture. And the exact positive and negative impact depend largely on the type of farming system and the practices applied. And we heard examples this morning, which are very interesting. Here, clearly, the pathways to a more sustainable livestock system requires, and we heard this morning as well, a systemic approach, holistic approach, if I used a word used this morning, considering the entire agri-food system and including societal expectations. Again, I'm repeating to some extent what was said this morning as well, with animal welfare, with health, and the use of antimicrobials, for instance. So the linear approaches really that were applied to large extent so far or in the past are not comprehensive enough for the challenges we face nowadays. An integrated approach that bring together different perspectives and dimensions to achieve more holistic solutions via research and innovation are required. And reconnecting livestock and plant-based agricultural system allows moving away from silo approaches, and it's a challenge in itself, and potentially provide better resources utilization, nutrients, land use, energy, and improve the ability to adapt to a more variable climate than non-integrated systems. And there is certainly a range of options available to farmers to integrate crops and livestock, and different types of mixed farming system may have both advantages and disadvantages depending on different factors, pedoclimatic conditions, land capability, technologies availability, market aspects, outlets, prices, and socioeconomic conditions. At the same time, several components of mixed farming systems, such as the use of locally available resources, plants, feed, livestock breed, grazing management, crop diversity and rotation, dual purpose, cropping for grazing, cutting, and for grain, novel feed resources, manure management, we heard about this morning, biorefineries, etc., may concur in improving the environmental and economic sustainability of mixed crop livestock farming. And here in the next few slides, I just want to show the systems approach, and with there a number of challenges, but also we can turn them into opportunities with different aspects of livestock production. If we look into the question of emissions and how to reduce emissions, the aspects of breeding and genetics, the feeding techniques, microbial ecosystems, alternative source of proteins, the grazing, legume production, not really the focus today, but also animal health and welfare, manure management and storage. The livestock system, there is not one single livestock system. There are plenty of livestock systems, and it's really quite complex. Here are three I could have shown, but I didn't want to borrow it, the animal task force diagram about the systems and the circular systems. But here are three examples, depending whether you look at specific sectors like the dairy value chain, if you look into the interconnection between crops and livestock, etc. So quite a complex issues, and there is no silver bullet. The policy framework that I mentioned, clearly the European Green Deal is behind the Farm to Fork strategy or the biodiversity strategy. And you heard about this morning also other policies like the CAP that is being agreed now and approved with a number of objectives. And one of the objectives of the new CAP, which is a cross-cutting objective, is about knowledge and innovation. Just to mention, because a number of them are very relevant to the focus of the discussion this morning, but also in this afternoon and the projects that will be presented, the EU targets and objectives to be achieved by 2030. In a number of cases, these are political targets. They are not embedded in legislation. In some cases, it is. So they're reducing by 50% chemical pesticides, by 20% chemical fertilizers, 25% share of organic production by 2030, reduce greenhouse gases emissions by at least 55%. And until 2030, it's not such a long time. It's 9 years, it's 9 growing seasons. Other specific EU R&I policies or legislative actions, the methane strategy that I mentioned earlier, you heard this morning about the Organic Action Plan, the Zero Pollution Action Plan, so plenty of EU policies and pieces of legislation that are enacted or being prepared, like the one on animal welfare legislation. There is a review ongoing to see if the welfare legislation is fit for purpose. If we now move to the concrete aspects of this afternoon with a presentation of different projects, just to illustrate here that it's under Horizon 2020, and all the projects presented this afternoon are from Horizon 2020. We started by designing, let's say, a research and innovation strategy for agriculture research back in 2016. And here you have another diagram about the way to see agriculture research, where you have, and that was embedded in that strategy about the resource management, integrated ecological approaches from farm to landscape, and healthier plants and animals. These were three dimensions, more kind of sectoral, if we can say, or more cross-cutting. This embedded into sustainable primary production, and above this, new openings for rural growth and enhancing human and social capital. And if for those who want to know more about the projects that have been developed in those areas, along Horizon 2020, because it's really a sample of projects that will be presented this afternoon. There are plenty of other projects. We have developed these fact sheets with summaries of projects in different domains. The ones specifically on livestock are about animal health and welfare and on animal production systems, but we have a number of other ones that are also relevant to livestock, with one on ecological approaches and organic farming, one on circular and innovative value chains, etc. These are available on the web. Our approach really towards agricultural research and innovation is based really on the framework program for research and innovation, together with the European, the EIP Agri, let's call it like this, the European Innovation Partnership on Agriculture, where we tried to link, and it will be hopefully even more under Horizon Europe, to link what we do in research with the CAP, or a part of the CAP, through agriculture and knowledge innovation. We have multi-actor projects, many of them, where users, actors, other than the research community, can be part of it. We have thematic networks, and I think at least one thematic network will be presented this afternoon, putting together the knowledge and disseminating the appropriate knowledge on practices, etc. It's not, as such, very much about research, but the knowledge, sharing the knowledge available. Now, just to give some insight relevant to the projects that will be presented this afternoon. First, these instruments, let's say, tackle various dimensions of resource use in the projects there, looking at approaches at the level of animals, of agroecosystems, and throughout value chains. And research projects do not always apply a system approach. And I'm not sure anybody knows how to have a systemic approach in research, through research projects. Probably we need a number of research projects, probably a research program more than research projects to do this. But we also address sustainability and resilience of livestock systems themselves in some projects as part of livestock system, as part of agriculture and economy. The Pathways project that will be presented this afternoon is a relevant illustration of this. The EC contribution to research on mixed farming and on grassland systems represents over 50 million euros in Horizon 2020. You will hear about mixed project and agro-mix projects this afternoon, and certainly the integration of livestock and crop is among the important elements to boost the implementation of sustainable farming practices such as agroecology. And among the agroecology practices that have the potential to accelerate the transition towards sustainable climate and ecosystem-friendly farming systems, we can mention mixed and multi-cropping, integration of legume crops in rotations, etc. The commission, and this is the first line on this slide. Second is also the Commission is supporting research and innovation activities on alternative proteins for feed and food, microalgae, insects, and plant products for a contribution of over 30 million euros in Horizon 2020. And this is in line with the objectives of the Farm to Fork strategy and the report of the development of plant proteins in the EU, the protein plant, so-called. One project, for instance, Legumes Translated, this afternoon will be illustrative of this. Also, EU-funded research and innovation on animal nutrition and feeding include projects on the understanding of the digestive physiology, on feeding techniques to optimize the potential of the feed and the animal, on the use of local feed for monogastrics in particular. And we have there a contribution altogether of something like 20 million euros invested in those. We also have research on microbial ecosystems, addressing the connection host-feed microbiome to improve breeding practices and develop host-tailored feeds, if we can. And on this point of view, in this aspect, Feed-A-Gene project, OKNet EcoFeed or Holoruminant, as well as infrastructure project Big Web, all presented this afternoon are quite illustrative of this. Now, for the last projects, over 50 million euros were committed on animal genomics and breeding to analyze genotype per environment interactions and aim to develop breeding strategies that utilize resilience and efficiency related traits, and at the same time balance economic, social, and environmental challenges. So a number of related projects will be shortly presented this afternoon. I will not list them here. With 7 projects would be too long. Certainly more needs to be done, and the relationship between animal feed and feeding and health and welfare, for instance, needs to certainly to be further investigated. An integrated approach that combines solutions based on the breeding and feeding practices is required in order to reduce livestock emission and pollutants. And certainly another important point is the implementation of circularity that will lead to further improved ways of valorizing and using residues and byproducts by farms. For instance, feed for livestock or fertilizer from manure. Now for the future, or for, well, oops. Okay. For the future, if we look at Horizon Europe, more resources are in principle available to address all these challenges. We have more or less 9 billion euros available in the cluster 6 devoted to food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture and environment. And this is about twice the amount we had for the same areas in Horizon 2020. And Horizon Europe is seen and is presented by the Commission as the kind of research and innovation arm of the Green Deal. And in line with this, we will have to work on a variety of priority areas that were defined to boost agriculture sustainability concerning the adaptation and mitigation of climate change, addressing research and innovation needs of the organic sector, and boost agroecology and agroforestry as approaches with the capacity to make our farming systems more sustainable, resilient, and environment and climate friendly. This will hopefully allow us to boost all the 3 dimensions of sustainability and also to contribute to climate policy. We will further enhance the circularity of the agricultural and rural economy, and we will make extensive use of the opportunities offered by the digital technology. We have published the first work program, 21-22 of Horizon Europe, and there are many calls for research and innovation actions to improve the interplay between livestock and cropping and the circularity. Now, the EU represents more or less, I think we estimate 10% of the public research and innovation investments made by member states. So for this reason, certainly fostering synergies between the EU and member states and other relevant countries becomes key. And we have different instruments that go beyond the classical research calls. What we will hear this afternoon are projects that are typical collaborative projects, plus 1 infrastructure projects. But with Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe, sorry, we have now these 2 big new approaches called missions and partnerships. And I will not go into details about the mission, but certainly to know that we have this mission called now a Soil Deal for Europe, focused on soil health on different dimensions, which will have a large-scale portfolio of coordinated actions to reach this objective. For instance, by 2030, where at least 75% of all soils in each EU member states should be healthy. But we have also partnerships that are concerted research and innovation efforts with EU and associated countries and even beyond, and possibly with the private sector, foundation or stakeholders. And we have 8 partnerships planned in Horizon Europe, but I would like maybe to focus on one in particular, which I think is quite relevant to this focus about livestock and crop interaction and integration. The partnership Agroecology, living labs and research infrastructures, where we don't start from scratch because ecological approaches were highlighted in the strategic approach to research and innovation in agriculture in 2016. We have developed already a number of projects. all these transnational RNI and thematic networks are worth over 250 million euros under Horizon 2020. And now with this partnership accelerating farming systems and transition, agroecology, living labs and research infrastructures, we think that this is a way to embed a holistic approach based on agroecology. It doesn't cover everything. We heard about new feeds, etc. this morning, so it's not about everything. But agroecology is certainly a holistic approach with a potential to transform agricultural systems, enhance sustainability. Agroecology relies more on nature and ecosystem services and less on synthetic inputs, and more diversity in crops and livestock. So it could help potentially to redesign farming systems, but with an increased complexity of the systems. And this agroecology partnership will very much work on the field. Really, the agroecology is dependent on territorial, local approach. The scale matters, so it's at the farm level and landscape level, and if necessary, territorial levels. And this is really something that we are building. We hope that those partnerships, some of the 8 partnerships I mentioned are already in the work program 21-22. These agroecology partnerships is planned for the work program 23-24, together with 2 other partnerships that I need to really mention. One is about safe and sustainable food systems, and there again, it could cover livestock and crops and the interaction, but it's quite broad scope. And another one which is less, maybe a bit less relevant, it's very relevant to livestock, but less to maybe a system approach with crops and livestock. It's the partnership on animal health and welfare that we plan to have also in the work program 23-24. And to really, and this was the last slide, I think, to conclude that obviously today is the opportunity to take stock of a sample of Horizon 2020 projects. Lessons can be learned from this. Knowledge acquired and gaps can be discussed, identifying the strengths and weaknesses of options towards more sustainable, resilient and efficient. We heard about this morning a lot. Efficient agricultural systems based on better connections between livestock and plants. And to end, we certainly value the cooperation with stakeholders, and in particular the Animal Task Force, and we value the suggestions of stakeholders in this work and context. Thank you.